Good, I now have the full transcript. Let me write the new story. I have everything I need. Here's the new story. The morning it finally made sense. I was standing in a parking lot outside a nail salon in Greenville, South Carolina, holding my late husband's ring in my hand, shaking so hard I could barely keep my grip on it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. My name is Richard Calloway. I'm 67 years old. For 34 years, I worked as a high school principal in the same district where I'd once been a student myself. I know what you're thinking. A principal's salary, nothing spectacular. But my father left me a modest inheritance when he passed. I'd invested conservatively for decades, and my wife Eleanor and I had paid off our house in full by 2009. When Eleanor died of breast cancer 3 years ago, I inherited everything outright. The house, the savings account, a small rental property on the edge of town that brought in about $1,400 a month. Not rich by any standard, but comfortable, stable. The kind of financial peace that takes a lifetime to build quietly. Eleanor had been the center of everything. When she went, she took most of the warmth with her. My son Dennis moved back in 8 months after her funeral. He was 38, recently divorced, between jobs, he'd say, transitioning, which I'd come to understand meant something different each time. He'd lost his position at a logistics company in Charlotte, something about a restructuring. He needed time to get back on his feet. Of course I said yes. He was my son. Eleanor would have wanted me to say yes. My daughter Carol lived 40 minutes away with her husband and their 2 kids. She worked as an ER nurse, which meant she kept strange hours and often looked exhausted when she visited. But she always visited. Every Sunday without fail, even when she was running on 4 hours of sleep. She'd sit across from me at the kitchen table and really look at me, the way nurses do, cataloging things without making it obvious. The first Sunday after Dennis moved back in, she sat across from me and said, "You look good, Dad. You doing okay?" I told her I was fine, and I was at the time. 3 weeks later, she asked the same question, but her eyes stayed on my face a beat longer than usual. "Still fine," I said, but I wasn't quite. There was something small and persistent, a low-level tiredness that coffee didn't fix, a slight heaviness in my stomach each morning. Nothing dramatic, nothing I'd have called a doctor over. I was 67 years old and it had been a hard 3 years. The body carries grief. I knew that much. Dennis had brought something back with him when he moved in. A small wooden box. The kind you'd keep cufflinks in, old and worn along the edges. He set it on the kitchen table one evening while we were eating dinner. "Found this in storage," he said, sliding it toward me. It was with some of Mom's things. I opened it. Inside, on a square of faded velvet, was Eleanor's ring. Her mother's ring, actually. A thin gold band with a small emerald set in a simple 4-pronged setting. Eleanor had worn it every day of our marriage alongside her own wedding band. It had been missing since her death. I'd assumed one of the nurses at the hospital had packed it away somewhere, or that it was lost in the general chaos of those final weeks. I looked up at Dennis. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite name, soft but attentive, like he was waiting for something specific. "She'd want you to have it," he said. "Keep it close." I picked up the ring and turned it in my fingers. It was cool and light. The emerald caught the kitchen light and threw a small green shimmer across the back of my hand. "Keep it close how?" I asked. Dennis reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thin gold chain, the kind you'd string a pendant on. "Simple, elegant. Wear it," he said. "Around your neck. That way it's always with you." He was right that Eleanor would have wanted that. She'd always complained that I kept important things locked away instead of carrying them with me. "Too careful," she'd say, smiling. "Too afraid to let good things touch you." I let Dennis thread the ring onto the chain and fasten it around my neck that evening. The ring settled against my sternum, cool under my shirt. I reached up and pressed my palm flat against my chest and felt the small, hard circle of it through the fabric. It felt like having her back, just a little, just enough. I thanked Dennis and he smiled, and that was the end of it, or so I believed. 2 weeks later, I woke at 4:30 in the morning with my stomach in full revolt. I barely made it to the bathroom. I sat on the edge of the tub afterward, breathing through my mouth, waiting for the nausea to pass. My hands were damp. The back of my neck was cold. I told myself it was something I'd eaten. I went back to bed and lay there until 6 a.m., watching the ceiling. The next morning, same thing. By the fourth morning, I called my doctor. Dr. Patel had been my physician for 11 years. She was methodical, unhurried, the kind of doctor who wrote everything down in a small notebook rather than staring at a laptop screen while you talked. She ran blood work, a full metabolic panel, thyroid function, kidney function, CBC. She checked my heart. She asked about stress, diet, sleep. Everything came back normal. Could be a delayed grief response. She said carefully, "The body sometimes defers. You go through the crisis, you hold yourself together, and then 18 months later your nervous system presents the bill." I sat with that explanation for a week. It was reasonable. It was possible. Eleanor had been gone 3 years, but the second year had been worse than the first in many ways. Maybe the third was the body's turn. But the nausea didn't ease. It settled in like a tenant who decided to stay. Carol came for Sunday dinner and I could see her noticing things. The way I barely touched my food. The fact that my shirts were fitting differently, loose in the shoulders, which told her I'd lost weight. She didn't say any of it directly. She asked about my appetite, my energy, whether I was sleeping. I answered each question as honestly as I could, which was, not great, and barely. "Dad," she said at the end of the evening, standing in the doorway with her coat on, "something's not right. I want you to see a specialist. Dr. Patel said it was stress. Dr. Patel said it was stress." Patel ran standard blood work. Her voice was gentle but firm. "That's not the same thing." Dennis was in the living room during this exchange. I could see him from where I stood, sitting in the armchair with his phone, apparently not listening. But something about the stillness of his posture made me think he was listening very carefully. I agreed to see a specialist to make Carol feel better. A gastroenterologist named Dr. Harmon ran a scope, found nothing. A hematologist reviewed my blood panel and ordered additional markers, all normal. An infectious disease doctor asked about recent travel, recent exposures, recent changes in my environment. "Has anything changed recently?" she asked. "New medications? New supplements? New objects in your home?" I thought about it. "My son moved back in," I said, "and I started wearing a ring on a chain around my neck. It belonged to my late wife." She looked at me over her reading glasses. "How long ago?" "About 6 weeks before the symptoms started." She made a note. "Have you had any skin irritation where the chain rests?" I pulled my collar aside. There was a faint redness along my sternum, a thin line exactly where the chain lay against my skin. I hadn't thought much of it. I'd assumed it was friction. She leaned forward and examined it. Then she sat back and said nothing for a moment. "I'd like to run a few additional tests," she said. "Heavy metal panel, among other things." I went home and waited. Dennis made dinner that night. He'd been doing that more frequently, cooking, offering to run errands, making my coffee in the morning before I came downstairs. He was attentive in a way he hadn't always been when he was younger. I was grateful for it at the time. I thought it meant something. I thought it meant that Eleanor's death had changed him the way it had changed me, had made him understand how quickly things can shift. The coffee was ready every morning when I came downstairs. Hot, exactly the way I liked it. I drank it without thinking. Carol came by on a Thursday that I didn't expect her. She'd switched shifts with a colleague, she said, and she had the afternoon free. Dennis was out. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, and I could see her watching me with the same expression she always had, that careful nurse's assessment she couldn't turn off even at home. "You've lost more weight," she said. "I know. Dad, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer me honestly. When have I ever not answered you honestly?" She folded her hands on the table. "Do you trust Dennis?" The question landed differently than I expected. Not with offense, but with something colder. A small shift in my chest, like a door opening onto a dark room. "He's my son," I said. "That's not what I asked." I looked at her. She looked back at me. Carol had Eleanor's eyes, that same directness that didn't flinch. "What are you telling me?" I asked. She took a breath. "I don't know yet. I'm not saying anything for certain. Something doesn't feel right to me, Dad. The way he watches you. The way he was in Mom's things before he moved back here." She paused. "Where did he find her ring? He said it was in storage." "What storage? We went through everything together. You and me. I don't remember there being a box with jewelry." I sat with that for a long moment. "He could have found it separately," I said. "I wasn't with him every moment." "No," Carol said quietly. "You weren't." She didn't say anything else. She helped me with the dishes and hugged me at the door and told me she'd call in the morning. But when she left, the air in the kitchen felt different somehow. Heavier. That night I lay in bed with my hand pressed against my chest, against Eleanor's ring. I thought about what Carol had said. I thought about Dennis in the armchair, not listening. I thought about the redness along my sternum, the line of irritation I dismissed as friction. I thought about the infectious disease doctor asking, "Has anything changed recently?" I tried to sleep. I couldn't. The results from the heavy metal panel took 8 days. Dr. Martinez, the infectious disease specialist, called me on a Tuesday morning. Her voice was measured, professional, but I'd been in enough difficult conversations in my career to hear the thing underneath the professional tone. "Mr. Dahl, Calloway," she said, "your test results came back and I'd like you to come in as soon as possible to discuss them." "Tell me now," I said. A beat of silence. "Your mercury levels are significantly elevated. Not dangerously acute, but high enough that the accumulation over time would explain every symptom you've been experiencing. This isn't something that happens from a single exposure. This is chronic. This is something you've been in contact with repeatedly over an extended period." I sat down. My legs had decided they were done supporting me. "How long?" I asked. "Based on the levels and your symptom timeline, likely 2 to 3 months of consistent exposure, possibly longer. Where would it come from?" "That's exactly what we need to figure out," she said. "I need you to think very carefully about everything in your environment. Everything you touch, eat, drink. Everything that's been in contact with your skin." I thought about the ring, the redness on my sternum, the chain that lay against my skin every hour of every day. I thought about Dennis finding it in storage that Carol had no memory of. Dennis sliding it onto a chain and fastening it around my neck himself. Dennis asking me to keep it close. "The ring," I said. My voice came out strange, hollow. "I'm sorry? I've been wearing a ring on a chain around my neck. It was my late wife's. My son gave it to me about 2 months before the symptoms started. I've worn it every day since." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Calloway," Dr. Relcherty, Martinez said carefully, "I think you need to remove that ring right now. Don't touch it with your bare hands. Use a cloth or a bag. And then I need you to come in immediately." I reached under my shirt and unclasped the chain. I let the ring fall into my palm and looked at it. It looked exactly the same as it always had. Thin gold band, small emerald, simple 4-pronged setting. Eleanor's mother's ring, the ring I'd pressed my palm against 100 times in the past 2 months, feeling the small hard circle of it through my shirt. But it wasn't Eleanor's mother's ring. I didn't know that yet, but I was beginning to understand that something was very wrong with the man who had given it to me. I drove to Carol's house instead of Dr. Martinez's office. I don't know exactly why. Something in me needed to see my daughter before I did anything else. Maybe I needed a witness. Maybe I needed someone who would believe me without me having to explain it twice. She opened the door, and one look at my face told her everything. She sat me down at her kitchen table, and I told her everything from the beginning. The ring. Dr. Martinez's call, the mercury levels, the redness on my sternum, all of it. Carol listened without interrupting. She was still in her scrubs. She'd just gotten home from a night shift. But she didn't look tired anymore. She looked like she was in the ER, which meant she'd shifted into that mode where she was fully present and processing everything at once. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Dad, I need to tell you something I found last week. I didn't want to say it until I was sure. I didn't want to be wrong about this." "Tell me." "I went into Dennis's room when he was out. I know I shouldn't have, but I had a feeling, and I found something in the back of his closet. A small container behind some boxes. It had a label on it, mercury chloride solution." The kitchen was very quiet. "Mercury chloride," I said. "It's used in laboratories. It's also highly toxic. You don't keep it in a residential closet, Dad. There's no reason to have it unless you're using it for something specific." She looked at me steadily, and I found a receipt. He ordered a ring from a custom jeweler in Charlotte 3 months ago. A gold band with an emerald. He had it made. It was a replica, I understood then. He had Eleanor's ring made, a copy, treated with mercury compound, designed to leach slowly through skin contact. He'd given me a poison replica of my dead wife's jewelry and told me to keep it close. To keep it close. I sat with my daughter in her kitchen, and neither of us spoke for a while. I thought about Dennis watching me from the armchair. Dennis making my coffee every morning before I came downstairs. Dennis asking how I was feeling, his eyes steady and attentive, waiting for something. Not concern, assessment. I thought about what the ring represented to me. Eleanor, the feeling of having her back, just a little. Dennis had used that. He'd used my grief like a tool, like a lever to keep me compliant, to keep me wearing the thing that was destroying me. I thought about the rental property, the savings account, the house, paid off and in my name. I knew what kind of debt Dennis had. I'd co-signed a personal loan 2 years ago, $15,000, that he'd told me he was paying off. I'd stopped asking about it. Fathers stop asking after a while. You get tired of the conversation. But $15,000 wasn't the kind of debt that made a man poison his father. What else was there? What hadn't I known about? "We have to go to the police," Carol said. Her voice was very calm. That was the nurse in her, I think. The part that had learned to be steady when everything else was falling apart. "I know," I said. "We have to do it today, Dad. Right now," I said. "We have to do it today, Dad. Right now. I know." She drove. She'd been awake for over 20 hours, but she drove like she was fully alert, hands at 10 and 2, eyes on the road. I sat in the passenger seat with Eleanor's fake ring wrapped in a paper towel in my shirt pocket, feeling the absence of it against my chest like a wound. The officer at the Greenville County Sheriff's Department who took our statement was named Deputy Whitaker, a serious man in his 40s who listened without expression and wrote everything down on a legal pad. When I mentioned the mercury chloride container in Dennis's closet, he looked up. "Is your son home right now?" "I don't know," I said. "Probably." "Don't contact him. Don't go home yet." He stood up. "I need to make some calls." They moved faster than I expected. Within an hour, a detective named Sandra Reyes was sitting across from us with Deputy Whitaker beside her, and she was asking me to walk through the entire timeline from the beginning. She had the kind of presence that made you believe things were going to be handled properly. Direct, unhurried, competent. The ring went to the crime lab. My blood sample went to the county toxicologist. Detective Reyes explained that if the ring tested positive for mercury compound and my blood confirmed chronic mercury poisoning, they had enough for an arrest warrant. What about motive? I asked. Walk me through your assets, she said. I did. The house, the savings, the rental property. I told her about the loan I'd co-signed. Do you have a current will? I do. Everything to Dennis and Carol equally. It hasn't been updated since Eleanor passed. Detective Reyes made a note. We'll want to look at his financial records. If he has debts beyond what you know about, that establishes motive clearly. Carol reached over and put her hand on top of mine. She'd been sitting beside me through the entire interview, silent mostly, occasionally clarifying a detail I'd gotten slightly wrong about dates or timing. We waited at Carol's house. Detective Reyes called at 8 p.m. The ring tested positive for mercuric chloride compound. It's been treated in a way that would cause slow, consistent dermal absorption over time. Your toxicology results are consistent with that exposure. A brief pause. We've picked up your son. He's in custody. I thanked her and hung up the phone. Carol was watching me from across the room. She had tears on her face, which surprised me. Carol cried at movies sometimes, at her kids' school plays, but not usually at things like this. At difficult things. She'd trained herself out of it. It's over, I said. She shook her head slowly. Not yet, but it's going to be. She was right. It wasn't over yet. Dennis was formally charged 3 days later. Attempted murder, aggravated assault. The financial records Detective Reyes had requested revealed what I hadn't known. Dennis had borrowed heavily from private sources over the previous 2 years, well over $200,000, to fund a series of failed investment schemes. He'd hidden it carefully. He'd paid the minimums on the visible debts and let the invisible ones compound in the background. My estate, split down the middle with Carol, would have netted him roughly $340,000 after costs, enough to clear the debt and start over. He'd calculated it. He'd sat at my kitchen table and eaten my food and made my coffee and watched me wear the thing he'd given me, and he'd calculated what I was worth to him dead. I didn't attend every day of the trial. My body was still recovering, which is a slow and unglamorous process. Mercury poisoning doesn't resolve quickly, and some mornings were still bad. But I was there for the verdict. The jury was out for 4 hours. They came back with guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Dennis to 18 years. He would be eligible for parole review after 12, which the prosecutor told me was likely given the severity and premeditation of the crime. I sat in the courtroom and looked at my son while the sentence was read. He didn't look at me. He stared at the table in front of him with an expression I couldn't read. Not remorse exactly. Something more like resignation, the look of someone who has accepted an outcome they always knew was possible. He'd known it was a gamble. He'd taken it anyway. Carol drove me home from the courthouse. We didn't talk much. There wasn't much to say that we hadn't already said to each other over the previous months. We'd talked about Dennis until we'd run out of new ways to talk about him, until we understood as much as we were going to understand about how a person arrives at the decision to do what he had done. We pulled into my driveway and she turned off the engine and we sat there for a minute. "You okay?" she asked. "Getting there," I said, and I meant it. My recovery took most of the following year. I worked with the toxicologist at the Medical University in Columbia, a careful and patient man who monitored my levels every 6 weeks and adjusted my treatment accordingly. The nausea lifted first. Then the fatigue began to ease, not all at once but gradually, like a weight being removed in small increments. My appetite came back. My strength came back. By the following spring, I was walking 3 miles in the morning, something I hadn't been able to do in almost 2 years. I updated my will. Carol and I went through Eleanor's actual belongings together, carefully, everything in its proper place. Her real ring, her mother's ring, the one she had actually worn, was in a small box in the back of my closet where I'd put it the week after her funeral. I'd known where it was the whole time. I had it cleaned and I put it on a new chain, and I wore it for one day just to see how it felt. Then I put it in a proper frame and hung it on the wall of my study, where I can see it from my desk. That feels more right. Some things don't need to be kept close to be kept safe. I think about what I missed, what I chose not to see because I didn't want to see it. The way Dennis would watch me at meals, that careful attentiveness that I'd told myself was love. The redness on my chest that I'd told myself was friction. The question Carol had asked and I'd deflected, "Do you trust him?" The answer I'd given, which wasn't an answer. "He's my son." That wasn't trust. That was a refusal to look. I've thought a lot about what made it possible for Dennis to do this, for as long as he did. And the honest answer is that I helped him. Not intentionally, not knowingly, but I helped him by refusing to pay attention to things I didn't want to know, by filling in uncomfortable questions with comfortable answers, by deciding that a man's love for his son was proof enough that the son loved him back. That's not how it works. I understand that now. Love isn't proof of anything. Actions are proof. Patterns are proof. The small, consistent choices a person makes every day, those are the evidence. I had plenty of evidence. I just didn't want to examine it. Carol saved my life. I want to be precise about that. She asked me the right question at the right time, and then she went looking in his room when her instincts told her to look. She was afraid she was wrong. She looked anyway. That's the thing about Carol that I've always admired and never properly acknowledged. She doesn't let fear of being wrong stop her from doing what needs to be done. I told her this, eventually. I wasn't very eloquent about it. I'm not a man who finds these conversations easy. But I told her. She hugged me in the kitchen and said, "You would have done the same for me." I thought about that for a long time afterward, whether that was true. Whether I had it in me to look at something that frightened me and look anyway. I'd like to think so. I'd like to think Eleanor's death and Dennis's trial and the year of recovery had made me better at that. At seeing clearly even when clarity is painful. At trusting what I know to be true even when I'd rather believe something easier. I'm still working on it. Some mornings I wake up at 4:30 and lie in the dark and think about the ring on the chain, the weight of it against my chest, and how certain I'd been that it was Eleanor. That she was still with me somehow, just a little. Dennis had known exactly what he was doing when he gave it to me. He'd known the shape of my grief and he'd used it. I don't forgive him for that specifically. The rest of it I'm working through in my own time, at my own pace. But that particular thing, the deliberate weaponizing of my love for my wife, that one sits differently. It may always sit differently. What I can say is that it didn't finish me. He thought it would. He'd calculated the timeline, the dosage, the gradual accumulation. He'd thought it through carefully, and he was wrong. I'm still here. My granddaughter turned 7 in April. Carol brought her by on a Saturday and I made pancakes, which is the only thing I've ever cooked reliably well. We sat at the kitchen table and she told me very seriously about a book she was reading, a long book with chapters, which she was proud of. I listened to every word. I walked 3 miles the next morning. The air smelled like cut grass and something blooming further up the street that I couldn't identify. My chest felt clear and my legs felt solid under me, and I walked all the way to the end of Magnolia and back without stopping. It was a good morning. Most of them are, now. I've thought a lot about what kind of man lets himself be poisoned for 2 months without seeing it coming. The honest answer is, a man who decided in advance what the truth was allowed to look like. I'd already decided Dennis had come home because he was struggling. I'd already decided the ring was Eleanor's because I wanted it to be. I'd already decided the redness on my chest was friction and the nausea was grief and the weight loss was age. Every uncomfortable detail, I filed it into a category that didn't require me to act. That didn't require me to look at my son and see something I didn't want to see. That's not innocence. That's a choice. And choices have consequences, whether you make them consciously or not. What Dennis did had consequences too, and they were inevitable the moment he made his first decision. Not the decision to buy the ring or the mercury compound or the chain. The first decision was earlier than that. The first decision was when he looked at a problem, a debt, a mess of his own making, and chose the path that required someone else to pay for it. That one decision, made quietly somewhere in a room I wasn't in, set everything else in motion. The replica ring, the chain, the Father's Day story about Eleanor wanting me to keep it close. Every subsequent choice followed from that first one like a chain of dominoes. You can't unmake the fall once it starts. Carol understood something I didn't. She paid attention not because she was suspicious by nature, but because she was honest enough to sit with discomfort rather than explain it away. She asked me, "Do you trust him?" And when I didn't answer the question, she went looking for the answer herself. That took courage. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that looks impressive from the outside, the quiet kind, the kind where you open a closet door knowing you might not like what you find and you open it anyway. That's what I want to carry forward from this. Not the betrayal, not the trial or the sentence or the years of recovery. What I want to carry is what Carol demonstrated, that honesty requires something from you. It requires you to look at what's actually in front of you, not what you'd prefer to see. It requires you to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing before you have enough information. It requires you sometimes to open the closet door. I spent most of my career as a principal trying to teach young people that character isn't what you do when things are easy. It's what you do when they're hard and when the right choice costs you something real. I believed that. I taught it. And then I went home and gave myself every excuse not to practice it in my own house. I'm not punishing myself for that. What's done is done, and I'm still here, which is more than Dennis's plan allowed for. But I think it matters to name it honestly. I failed the test I spent decades administering to other people. And that failure nearly killed me. What saved me wasn't luck exactly. It was Carol's willingness to pay attention when I wouldn't. It was Dr. Martinez asking one careful question about what had changed. He was a jeweler in a strip mall in Greenville who noticed something wrong and said so clearly. People doing their jobs. People paying attention. People choosing honesty over comfort in small ways that turned out to matter enormously. I walk 3 miles every morning now. My chest is clear. My legs are solid. Eleanor's real ring is on the wall of my study where I can see it from my desk, and that feels exactly right. Dennis is in prison. That's a consequence, not a punishment. The difference matters to me. Punishment is something imposed from outside. Consequences are what happens when a series of choices reaches its natural end. He made his choices. I made mine. We both ended up exactly where those choices pointed. The only question worth asking now is where the next set of choices points. And I know the answer to that one. Forward. Paying attention, eyes open this time.